Okay, well, let's begin. Here we are at class 19. Anybody know how many classes we have this semester?
42.
42, that's right. I'm counting them down just like you are. Just kidding. Yeah, so we're about halfway there, and things are going to continue to get real interesting. I'm glad to see that lots of people have computers today because we're going to be working with Excel again. We're getting to the part of the semester where we're applying some of the foundational ideas from earlier to more and more decision-making methods. So decision-making is really the heart of this course, how to know which alternative is best and how to optimize the use of resources, how to maximize profit, how to do the most good with the least amount of money. So that's where we're headed. Homework 7 is due on Monday. And remember, I've announced previously, and you can find it in your course schedule, that Friday and Monday's lectures are going to be video recordings that are posted online. So those will be the last of the 8 meetings this semester that we have, which are recorded lectures. Out of our 42 class meetings, 8 of them are pre-recorded lectures, and these are number 7 and number 8. So then we'll be all live all the time for the rest of the semester. So Friday of last week and Monday of this week, I talked a little bit about the project, and I would encourage you to read through the entirety of the assignment description. And what you ought to be doing is thinking about, what are you going to do after you graduate? What kind of money will you make? What will your career prospects look like over the long term? And begin thinking about data sources that can give you a sense for what the likely pay is going to be. Because section 1 of that project is all about assessing your income over the entirety of your career. Okay, so those are our announcements. Any questions about those? Today we are going to be talking about a decision technique called internal rate of return. And then we're going to get a little bit more practice with bonds because those can be tricky to do the calculations on. So we'll get a little more practice. Both of these are important things that I believe are included on homework 7. There are several bond problems on homework 7. So that's what we'll be doing. This figure is what we looked at last time when we did an unrecovered investment balance calculation. And so one of your homework problems says in bold, unrecovered investment balance. And so on that homework problem, you should basically just apply the same methods that we used in Monday's in-class exercise, where we went through the steps to show over time how the investment you had originally made is brought down through the profits that you retain. So the purpose of this figure is to illustrate that after a certain number of years, there's an equilibrium between the inflow and the outflow. The money that you spent early on in the project, your outflow of money to buy a food truck, for instance, that comes back to you in the form of annual profits. And at a certain interest rate, over a certain number of years, you experience that break-even point. So that's just a quick recap of what we talked about on Monday. What we're going to do today is look at the effective interest rates on profitability. Because sometimes the same piece of equipment over the same number of years and the same kind of revenue it's going to generate, that same piece of equipment can sometimes be profitable or sometimes be unprofitable depending on who your bank is and what interest rate they're charging you. And so just as an illustration of that, a couple of years back, I went to the website of Huntington Bank and Star Federal Credit Union. And I just did a screenshot that day to find out what were the loan rates that they were charging for a 66-month loan. So if you're buying a car and you finance it over 66 months, at that time, Huntington Bank wanted 4.72%. And it may be higher or lower than that today, depending on the market and how much the Federal Reserve is charging banks to borrow money from them and so on. But it varies, is the point. At the same day, Star USA Federal Credit Union was only charging 2.75%. So those are two different interest rates that we're going to contrast when trying to figure out whether it would be profitable to buy an F-150. Now you can see that this is from 2016, and at that time the F-150 was $54,000 for this particular vehicle. Vehicles are always getting more expensive, but you could buy a cheaper truck, but this is, you know, kind of maybe a middle of the road, well-equipped vehicle. And let's consider the following hypothetical scenario, that if you buy the truck, you're going to use it for business purposes, and it would generate an additional $900 a month in new revenue. So subtracting out the operation costs of this vehicle, the $900 is profits that you would have that you can't have if you don't buy the truck. So the question is, should you buy the truck? And what we will do is we'll consider this hypothetical with both the 4.72% interest rate and with the 2.75% interest rate. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up an Excel spreadsheet, and you don't have to follow along like on Excel. You can just watch this. And our interest rate per year, we will have for one of them 0.0472. So that's 4.72%, just changing it to decimal form. So that's the loan rate for Huntington Bank. That was the interest rate per year. Interest rate per month is what I need because that's the interest rate per period. So it would just be the annual interest rate divided by 12. So now I have the interest rate per period, and then the truck cost. That vehicle was $54,105. And let's assume that includes the title and the licensing and the tax you have to pay on a new vehicle. So that's the all-in lump sum present value cost to purchase it. And then our monthly revenue, we're going to get each month that this vehicle is in operation an additional $900. Okay, so to assess this, I'm going to have our month, amount, and PV of amount. We've seen these columns before. Sometimes we call it period number or year, but this is a monthly analysis. And so we're going to go through 66 months. Let me drag this down till I see that I've got 66 months. And each month I get this revenue of $900. So I'll anchor the reference there and drag that down through all of them by double clicking at the bottom right. All right, the PV of amount, I'll use our interest rate per month, anchor the reference. The N, we're discounting all of these amounts to the present, so I'll use 0 for this amount that's already at the present, and then this $900 that's at month 1, that will be discounted 1 month to the present. So we want to find out what's the present value of all these future revenues. Because if the present value of the future revenues is more than the purchase cost, then the purchase is justified. If the value of all that money in the future, when discounted today, is more valuable than how much you spend for the truck, then that assures you that it will be profitable. Okay, so that's the NPR, number of periods. I'm skipping over the payment because each one of these is being treated like an individual future amount that's being discounted to the present. So this is the same thing we've done on dozens of prior occasions. And let me just double click to send that down through all of them. So it's interesting to see that $900, 66 months from now, only has a present value of $694.58. And that makes sense because 4.72% discount each year. I don't even know how many years is 66 months. Is that like 5 years, 6 years? 5.5 years. So this $900 is being moved back in time 5.5 years, and every time it goes a year, it's losing about 4.72%. So it's not going to be worth the same amount. $900 in the future, when converted to present value, is lower. So all of this kind of makes conceptual sense to us based on what we know. And I'm going to add another line here just because it's more convenient up at the top if I identify the total. So I'm going to have, I'll just do the sum function, equals sum I'll start down here, and I'm going to press Control, Shift, and the down arrow, and it goes through the bottom of the list. Enter. All right, so 53,105. Let's see, 53,126. And so, would it be justified to do this purchase if my interest rate is 4.72%? I see some people shaking their heads no. Why not? Why shouldn't I buy that truck? It's got leather seats. It's got air conditioning. What is it?
It costs more than you're going to make.
Exactly. It costs more than the value of your revenue in the future. So don't buy the truck. You'll be operating that truck and going to all of those jobs and losing money in the end. Now, this assumes the truck has no salvage value at the end. That just we're going to operate it for those 66 months and then drive it in the Ohio River. You know, some people are that hard on their trucks. I'm not, but some people are. You know, like if you're using it in the mining industry, maybe you'll only get a couple of years out of a truck before it's really worn out. Okay, so let's just put a little conclusion here, conclusion. At 4.72% annual interest, that was 0.393% per month. The truck purchase is not profitable. Don't buy it, even though it has leather seats. All right, so that's at 4.72%. But what if we went and found someone who would loan us the money at a lower rate? How is that going to change this spreadsheet? Before I actually put in the lower rate, tell me. Right now it's 4.72% per year. What's going to happen to this $900 66 months in the future if I use a lower interest rate for discounting?
It'll be worth more.
It's going to be worth more. Tell me more about that. Why will it be worth more at the present?
Because you're discounting less.
You're discounting less. One more, break it down even further for me. What would be another way to explain it to someone who maybe doesn't understand discounting?
You're giving the loaner less money each payment.
Okay, that's a great way to think about it. You know, less of that $900 goes to the bank. More of it goes to you. So the interest is less, and so more of the profits are yours. Each one of these $900, a portion of it goes to recoup the loan, and a portion of it you get to keep. So we're moving this $900 backwards in time, 66 periods. And if each time you move it backwards, the discounting rate is lower, then that means the present value of the $900 is greater. So $694 was what it was at 4.72. The other interest rate is 2.75, so I'll do 0.0275. This is looking promising. The total value is greater than the truck cost. And if we just check in with this $900 that was at month 66, before it wasn't even worth $700 in today's terms. But when the interest rate is lower, the discounting is less drastic. And so the two ways to think about it is the future revenues are more valuable in today's terms when your interest rate is lower. And that's how you'd think about it if it was your money to begin with. Like if you were investing money that you already had in the bank, you know, like if the money is yours to begin with, you're not paying anyone a loan, but you do have other places you could have put that money. You know, there is an opportunity cost, and you have in your mind a MAR, minimum attractive rate of return. So the lower the interest rate, the greater relative value these future amounts have in the present. So the take-home message, conclusion, at 2.75% annual interest, which works out to 0.229% per month, the truck purchase is justified. Because the profits are more than the cost. Okay, so does everybody follow me so far? Okay, good. Let's talk about the conceptual thing here. The internal rate of return is some unknown interest rate that you're trying to solve for. Each project has a different internal rate of return. And what it is it's the interest rate that makes the inflows and the outflows equal. Back to this spreadsheet. Are the inflows and the outflows equal right now? No. Right now, the inflows, the money you get, is bigger than the outflows. Because the inflows, here's your profit. Let me label this. This is the inflow. Money you get. And then this. This is the outflow. Money you spend. So right now, at 2.75%, the inflow is bigger than the outflow. What about when it was at 4.72? When it's at 4.72, the outflow was bigger than the inflow. What we want to find is some interest rate that makes the outflow and the inflow equal. That is the internal rate of return. And we can do it with Excel. There are graphical methods, but you can only calculate the internal rate of return when there is more revenue than outflows. So you can't calculate a negative rate of return. Like if you're just spending money, you may remember back to one in-class exercise we had for a dredging project, where you had to spend a lot of money, but you only got a little bit of money. It was because a municipality needed to keep a shipping channel open, and they weren't necessarily doing it just for profits. Internal rate of return could not be calculated for that particular dredging project because the outflows were more than the inflows. You can only calculate IRR if the project is profitable. And we use it for decision making because if the internal rate of return is greater than or equal to the MAR, that is an indicator that the project is acceptable. If the internal rate of return is less than the MAR, then that tells you the project should be rejected. This is really all you can do with internal rate of return. As I'll talk about in a future class, you can't compare two different projects and simply pick the one that has the highest internal rate of return. That is not a valid approach, and you'll hear more about why. What you can do is you can use this internal rate of return for initial screening to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to projects. So any questions so far?
So the MAR, that's the minimum attractive rate of return, and that's just defined like, how would you define that?
Well, the minimum attractive rate of return is usually a policy decision in each organization, and it may be tied to your borrowing costs. It could be based on how many good project options you have available, and it's usually a given. In a problem or a homework, I'll tell you what the MAR is. If you're working in a company, then it's probably tied to how much it costs you to borrow money from the bank. So internal rate of return, I star, is the amount that you earn on the unrecovered investment balance, or if you've borrowed money, the internal rate of return is the rate that you're paying on the money that's borrowed. You'll solve for it by finding the unknown rate that brings equilibrium between the inflow and the outflow. And so let's say you have a cash flow diagram. Your procedure is set up a spreadsheet to discount all the values to the present, just like we did here. Set up a spreadsheet that has year or period or month, so like some time column, an amount, and present value of amount. So you take all of the amounts to the present, and then you keep playing around with the interest rate until the sum of the present worths is 0, including the lump sum at the initial time that you had to pay to purchase the item. So that's the process we're going to go through today. Looking at it another way, the equation for solving for the interest rate is you want the present worth to be equal to 0. This is how your book puts it. Your textbook says the internal rate of return is the interest rate that makes the sum of the revenues minus the sum of the expenses equal to 0 when you have discounted all of the revenues and all of the expenses to the present. So like here in the parentheses, this is just saying find the present value of any amount that's in the future, discount at this interest rate, I prime, which is the internal rate of return, and so take it k years, however many years it is to get it to the present. And so if you do that for all of the revenue and all of the expenses, the magical interest rate, I prime, that makes them in equilibrium so that revenue minus expenses is equal to 0, that's what you're solving for. It's not really magical, it's just unknown initially. So when we were doing our Ford truck, what happened when we were using a big interest rate? Do you remember what was bigger, the costs or the revenue when you had the big interest rate, the 4.72%? The costs were more. So our overall present worth was negative. If you have the revenue minus expenses, when we had that big interest rate for the truck, combining the two, we were in negative territory. When we used the lower interest rate, we were in positive territory because those future amounts were being discounted less aggressively. There is some interest rate between them where there's a crossover point. So here's a graphical representation of how when your interest rate is too low, the present worth is positive. When the interest rate is too high, it's negative. We want to find where does the interest rate make it so that the revenue and expenses are equal. The difference is 0. So here's these warnings again. You can use it to compare a project to the minimum attractive rate of return. And with that comparison, you're able to accept or reject that project as feasible or not feasible. But what you shouldn't do is take several different options and compare their internal rates of return, because doing that is not going to allow you to pick the best option. IRR alone cannot identify which is the most profitable project. And I'll give you a proof of that in, I think it's Friday's recorded class. And there's one assumption that you need to know about. I'll probably give you another concept question on our next midterm. And one of the concepts that I've asked previous classes about was what are the assumptions behind the internal rate of return analysis. And so internal rate of return assumes that all of the profits you're getting are reinvested back into the project. And so it's assuming compounding at the internal rate of return. So the assumption is that all of the cash flow that's generated, you know, that $900 a month you get for your truck, it assumes that you're taking those profits and you're reinvesting it into some investment that makes the same rate of return as the truck itself. So like a bank account. If you have a bank account, the bank gives you interest payments each month, and you can leave those interest payments in the bank account, and so that they'll, accumulate, compound. That compounding interest is an example of reinvestment.
So that's like why you apply like the interest rate like to the amount that you get, like the revenue?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the in-class exercise for today. I've given you a cash flow diagram, and I would like you to set up a cash flow table from that. So translate this diagram into a cash flow table, and so just to give you an idea of maybe what that spreadsheet will look like, it's going to be very similar to what we had on this other workbook. So your problem 1A, you're going to have an interest rate of 0.07. You'll have year, let me make this a bit bigger, year, amount, and PV of amount. And then you'll have similar columns for part B, where we will have I equals 0.08. You're going to have year amount and PV of amount. So we'll have, in this cash flow diagram, you can see it goes 0 through 8. So anything that's down is a negative amount, anything that's up is a positive amount. And to find the answer to the first part, it's just I want to know what's the present worth at 7% and what's the present worth at 8%. So discount all these future amounts at 7%, discount them at 8%. I guess what we'll have at the bottom there was going to be a sum. We'll go down here through 8. Same thing over here. And then there's going to be a sum. Okay, if you don't have a computer, my suggestion is scoot up next to somebody who does, breathe down their neck, observe what they're doing, give suggestions, watch what's happening. And so I'll circulate around, give you some time to work on this, and then I'll go through it. I'll do the solution on the screen just to make sure that we all understand how to solve the first part. You can keep working if you like. I'm just going to put the amounts into the spreadsheet here so that you can see what the solution is. It's easy to type the amounts wrong. One of the ways to avoid that is if you format it as currency at the beginning, then you'll see the commas. And so at the very least, having the commas in the spot where you expect them will help you to avoid typing it in wrong maybe. Rather than type everything in a second time, I'm just going to copy all of this and Control C to copy, then highlight this cell, Control V to paste, and I'll need to update my reference to the interest rate. You can just click and, oh, hold on, I'm back in the formula here. See how it's highlighted in blue? If I click on the right spot, then I can, okay, right here in the border, there, drag it over to that one. And then drag the formula down. Okay. And then I can just Control C and Control V here, and it won't paste the amount, it'll paste the formula. So if I Control V, then it's pasted the formula, which is just find the sum of the cells above it. So at 7%, at the lower interest rate, you have a positive present worth. At 8%, you have a negative present worth. That's pretty similar to the truck example, where the higher interest rate discounted those future revenues more so that your initial outflow of cash at the outset of the project is outweighing the future revenues. So we will lose money if we have to pay 8%. Okay, so now here in part 2, it's saying copy the cash flow diagram data from this spreadsheet to another one. So just so you've got this available, let's just call this like problem 1, and then we'll create a new workbook that we call problem 2. So down at the bottom, I've renamed the tab, and just copy all of this, Control C, and paste it over here. I guess Control V is maybe a little old-fashioned. You can use these buttons across the top as well. There's, like paste, if that's the way you prefer it. Okay, so this is that same data, and now in the next part of the in-class exercise, it's asking you to determine the internal rate of return. So you can play around with it manually. What we're looking for is what interest rate makes that 0. So you could say, well, 7 is too low. What about 7.1%? That's closer. What about 7.2%? Getting warmer. 7.3? Okay, this is getting tedious. So how can we avoid having to manually put that in over and over and over? Goal seek, yes. So it's on data, what if analysis, goal seek, our old friend, where we want to set this total to a value of 0 by changing the interest rate. So we're telling Excel it has permission here on this second sheet. It has permission to play around with the interest rate until the sum of the present values is equal to 0. And that's the definition of the internal rate of return. So it looks like our answer here, the internal rate of return for this project is 7.633%. I've rounded this last bit. Look at all the digits it has. It's just displaying however many I indicate. It's good to get in the habit of typing a conclusion, because it'll remind you later on like what you did after a certain analysis. It's one thing to know where to click and how to drag down, like the mechanics of setting up a spreadsheet. That's valuable information, but probably even more important is the interpretation and the application of that process. And so here our conclusion, or identifying the answer, is where we demonstrate that we've solved the question. We didn't do this for some random reason. We did this because we knew that maybe we could even put in an answer, because that is the interest rate that brings the sum of the present worth to 0. That's even better. Let me do this text wrapping, and then it won't go so wide if I do the text wrapping, which is that button. You can make it however wide you want. All right, so there's one more thing on this internal rate of return that I want to show you. We did it kind of the manual way with goal seek. There is a function called the IRR function. So let's try using that. Let's use the IRR function. All right. Down here, I'm going to do the IRR function. So we begin equations with an equals sign, then IRR, and then a parentheses. And it's just saying values. Values is required. Here in brackets where it says guess, anytime it's in brackets like that, it means it's an optional thing. You don't have to give it what it's asking for in the brackets. If you had a lot of values, giving it an initial guess as a starting point would make it find the solution faster. But it can find the solution without you giving a guess. So we won't bother giving it a guess. So it just wants to know, what are the amounts? Don't use these amounts that are already in the present. Just use the raw amounts before there's any conversion. So you just highlight the amounts in order. It's assuming that what's at the top of the list is some amount at times 0. And then it's assuming that every next amount it sees in that range is in subsequent years. So year 1, year 2, year 3. So this IRR function is going to basically go through the same process that we just did. For every amount that it encounters, it's going to discount it to the present, and it's going to simultaneously do that by playing around with lots of different interest rates until it finds the interest rate that makes the sum of the present worths equal to 0. And then it's going to tell you what that interest rate was. So it's running a little routine because of this internal rate of return function. It's doing what we just did with the setup above that. So as soon as I press enter, it says 8%, but wait, it said 7.6%. The discrepancy is just simply that right now it's not showing all of the precision. So we can change that here in the ribbon, increase, and there's the same 7.633% that we had identified earlier. Sometimes in the homework, I want you to do this full method just so I can see that you get the practice of it, so that you understand the ideas. Because there are times when the IRR function isn't going to get you to where you need to go. You can always check your work with the IRR function, but you need to know how to do the manual method, because we're going to do something called an incremental analysis later on, where you're comparing alternatives, and so you have to know how to actually set it up yourself. Any questions about the IRR function?
I think I got one. Sorry, Emma. How are you supposed to do the thing that the part that says guess, or are we just supposed to skip that or something?
Yeah, just skip the part where it says guess.
Oh, I'm just curious. Just really want to make sure.
Yep. All right, so last thing today is this bond problem. We've got 8 minutes remaining. All right, so here's the setup. You want to achieve an annual yield of 12%. What price should you pay today for a bond that pays $50 in monthly interest for the next 5 years, then gives a lump sum payment of $6,000? Okay, so what this bond looks like is we want to know how much should you pay today. So what outflow do you need where you're going to get all these payments over time? How many payments are there?
5, I think.
5 years, but it's giving us monthly payments. 60. So 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 60. All right. And the amount of the payments is 50. In this equation, where does 50 go?
The P to A factor.
We're going to apply the P to A factor to 50, but 50 is R times Z. R times Z is the interest amount. So R is the interest rate, like the coupon rate for the bond, and Z is the face value. So collectively, together, if you multiply the interest rate of the bond by the face value of the bond, that's how you find out the interest amount that you get. But here, this has told you directly how much interest you get. You get 50. So we don't know R or Z. We just know the product of the two, which is fine. That's all we really need, because we're going to discount R to Z at this I. This I is the yield. So R is the face value rate. I is the yield rate. And so 12% per year, but we're doing this in monthly periods. And so what is I?
5%. 1%.
It's 1%. It's 0.12, 12% divided by 12, so 0.01. All right, so this problem, you need to find the present value of the payments and the present value of the lump sum, because there's also, it's a known lump sum amount. It's a future value of 6,000. Okay, so in the handout, do I give you the 1% table? Is it on the handout? No?
It gives you the equations.
The equations. All right, that must mean I want you to use the equation method. All right, so use the equation method to find P/A. Use the equation method to find P/F. And let's price this bond. Yeah, there it is. There's the equations at the bottom. I see it now.
I'm not sure. So, I think C would be like the present value of the 6,000. Just saying like C, we do P to F, that I, and that N.
Yeah, but you would still do, basically C is 6,000, if you do 6,000 times your.
Oh, yeah, times your factor. Yeah.
All right, so let me pull up the answer here. Just because we're running out of time, of course, you can keep working, but that bond is worth $5,550.45 if we're trying to achieve an annual yield of 12%. By the way, that's the nominal yield. That's not the effective yield. Anybody else get that same value, 5,550? All right, nice work. That's it for today. Remember that Friday and Monday, the recordings will be posted. I'll send you a link via email, and I'll also post it onto Blackboard. And then I'll see you back in person a week from today. If anybody didn't have their exam back or needs a copy of the project, come up to the front.
I have this class on Friday.
Uh-huh.
I was wondering, is that the right answer for the in-class exercise?